The morning it all started felt like any other. The sun had just crested the edge of our suburban street, sending soft beams through the blinds in our kitchen. Caroline was sipping her usual black coffee at the Marble Island, dressed in a light beige blouse and high-waisted jeans that always made her look like she stepped out of a lifestyle magazine. Our two kids, Emma and Theo, were bickering gently over cereal flavors, and I was just finishing my own coffee when she casually mentioned a trip to the mall. "I need to grab something for my brother's birthday," she said, rinsing her cup and placing it neatly in the dishwasher. I paused, frowning faintly. "I didn't know your brother's birthday was coming up." She turned slightly, brushing her chestnut hair behind her ear. "It's next week. I thought I'd get him something nice. Cologne, maybe." Something about her tone felt overly precise, rehearsed even, but I nodded anyway. "Which one?" She smiled. "That new Dior one. He mentioned it a few weeks ago." I didn't press, just nodded, said, "All right," and went back to scrolling through my phone. But something didn't sit right. Caroline didn't have a brother. I know that sounds strange. How could I forget something like that? But I didn't forget. I knew her family inside and out. Her parents, Leonard and Ruth, lived 3 towns over. She had an older sister, Danielle, who lived in Chicago and came down for holidays. But there was no brother. Not a mention of one in the 10 years we'd been together. No photos. No conversations. No funeral. No estrangement. No long-lost sibling story. Just nothing. Still, I didn't say anything. Later that afternoon, while the kids were with my mother, I came home from work early and noticed the navy blue Nordstrom bag sitting on the dining table. Caroline wasn't home yet. I peeked inside. Cologne. Dior Sauvage Elixir. $250, still sealed. The receipt was tucked inside, along with a blank gift tag and a small box of silver wrapping paper. I took a photo with my phone and gently put it all back the way I found it. That night, I watched her more carefully. She was her usual self, quick to laugh, warm to the kids, affectionate in subtle ways with me. But I couldn't stop wondering, if there was no brother, who was the cologne for? The next day, curiosity gave way to obsession. I went into my office at the firm, but couldn't focus. I found myself staring at our wedding photo on my desk, Caroline in her ivory dress, me in a navy suit, both of us looking impossibly young and naive. Back then, the idea of her lying felt like a joke. Unthinkable. Now, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was the one being played. I took a long lunch and drove to her parents' house under the pretense of dropping off some of Theo's old toys for their donation drive. Ruth greeted me at the door, smiling as always, and invited me in. We chatted for a while, mostly about the kids, and then I slipped in the question. "Hey, when's Caroline's brother's birthday again?" Ruth blinked. "Brother?" "Yeah," I said, casual, like I hadn't rehearsed the question 10 different ways in my head. She said she was buying him a gift. Ruth tilted her head, lips tightening slightly. "Sweetheart, Caroline doesn't have a brother. She never did." I nodded slowly, smiled. That's what I thought. That night, the cold knowledge sat inside me like a weight. I said nothing to her, just watched. She wore her pale blue satin pajamas, curled up beside me on the couch, reading from her tablet. Her hair was still damp from her shower, and she smelled like eucalyptus shampoo. The scent used to calm me. That night, it made my skin crawl. I didn't sleep. My mind kept turning over the questions. Who was she buying the cologne for? Why lie about having a brother? And if this was one lie, how many more were hidden under the surface? I began checking her phone when she showered, when she went for runs, when she was in the shower or upstairs reading to the kids. Nothing. Clean. Too clean. Even her browser history was boring. Recipe blogs, online clothing stores, parenting sites. No second phone. No suggestive messages. Not even a whiff of suspicion, except the cologne and the lie. Then I checked the car. One night, after she fell asleep, I slipped outside barefoot and opened the passenger side door of her SUV. In the glove compartment, I found a crumpled Nordstrom bag. No receipt. In the center console, a forgotten receipt from a restaurant. Not a chain, but a small bistro downtown. Dated last Tuesday. 2 entrees, wine, dessert. She told me she had a client dinner that night, with her team from the marketing agency. But this place was nowhere near their office. I drove past it the next morning. Tiny, quiet, romantic. Not the kind of place you take colleagues. Not unless you're dating one of them. I booked a session with a private investigator the same day. Old school, grizzled guy named DuPont. He didn't blink when I explained the situation. Tell me everything, he said, notepad open. Start from the first red flag. When I mentioned the cologne, he smiled faintly. They always slip up with gifts. He promised to be discreet. Said he'd need a week. Maybe 2. Meanwhile, I waited. I watched her make breakfast for the kids like she always did, humming softly under her breath. I watched her press kisses to my cheek, ask how my day was, fold my laundry with practiced ease. I memorized the new tone in her voice, too sweet, too light, and the way she seemed to stare a second too long at her phone before putting it down. Every detail became a clue. Every touch felt rehearsed. The illusion of normalcy made me feel like I was suffocating. I started staying at work longer, leaving before dawn, coming back late. She didn't complain, didn't even ask why. One night, as I sat in the dark office alone, the call came. DuPont's voice was low, matter of fact. I've got something. She's been meeting a man, regularly. Same guy, same spot. Wednesdays, usually. Photos incoming. I gripped the edge of my desk. Who is he? I don't know his name yet, DuPont said. But I can tell you this much. She calls him baby. And last week, he left her apartment with the cologne you described. Still sealed. The line went dead a few seconds later. I stared at the screen. There it was. Proof. She had given him the cologne. A man who wasn't me. A man who wasn't her brother, because he didn't exist. I sat in my car for an hour before going home, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. When I finally walked through the door, she was there, barefoot in the kitchen, slicing apples for Theo's snack. She turned and smiled. Hey, you're home early. I stared at her, my heart thudding like a war drum in my chest. I wanted to ask, to scream, to demand answers. Instead, I smiled back. Yeah, thought I'd surprise you. She leaned in to kiss me. Her lips tasted like honey and betrayal. The days that followed blurred into each other, a parade of practiced smiles and carefully measured silences. I walked through the house like a man in a museum of memories, everything preserved just enough to look familiar, yet every detail now laced with a quiet, poisonous doubt. I had the photos. DuPont delivered them in a plain manila envelope, dropped off at my office. I waited until everyone else had gone home before I opened it. Inside were 8 photos, printed on glossy paper, each one worse than the last. In one, she's standing outside the restaurant, her arms wrapped around him. He's taller than me, clean-shaven, broad-shouldered. His hand rests on her lower back. Too familiar, too comfortable. Another shows them sitting close inside the bistro, heads tilted together, eyes locked. In the third, he's holding a gift bag, navy blue, unmistakably from Nordstrom, with the Dior logo just visible beneath the tissue paper. But the worst was the last one. They were in her car, parked 2 streets over from our home. She was in the driver's seat, angled toward him. His hand cupped her cheek, thumb brushing her lower lip. Her eyes were closed. His lips were almost touching hers. I stared at that one the longest. The woman in that photo, the woman I had shared a bed with for a decade, didn't look like the Caroline I knew. Or maybe she did, and I had just never seen her like that. Not with me. A knot twisted in my chest. I tucked the envelope back in my desk drawer and turned off the light. When I got home that night, she was already asleep. I stood in the doorway for a long time, watching her breathe. I couldn't look at her the same way after that. By the following week, I had gathered more than just photos. DuPont had a name. Elliot Brandt, he said over the phone. Late 30s. Unmarried. Works at a boutique creative agency downtown. Copy director. Do they work together? Not officially. Her agency and his have partnered on a few campaigns. I found photos of both of them at an industry mixer 3 months ago. First sighting together. That lined up too well. Caroline had come home flushed that night, half laughing, blaming the wine and the heat. She'd kissed me with unusual intensity before slipping into the shower. At the time, I chalked it up to a rare good mood. Now I wasn't so sure. I had DuPont follow Elliot, too. He lived alone in a converted loft with exposed brick and too many plants. The kind of place that looks effortless, but you know it took hours of curated minimalism to achieve. They met there twice. Once on a Saturday afternoon when she claimed she was helping a friend move. The other on a Thursday evening. The same night, she'd told me she was stuck late at work finalizing a pitch deck. Each time, she stayed just under 2 hours. Long enough to do what she was doing. Not long enough to feel like cheating, I imagined, in her own mind. Like it didn't count. That was the part that got me. The ease with which she folded these lies into our lives. The house itself began to feel like a stage set. I moved through it like an actor in a play I no longer understood. The breakfast table, the couch, even our bed, they all held memories that now felt counterfeit. She kept up the act beautifully. Still packed the kids' lunches with care. Still laughed at my terrible jokes. Still curled beside me on the couch during movie nights, her hand on my leg, her head against my shoulder. And I let her. Not because I forgave her, but because I wasn't ready. Not yet. I wanted to see how far she'd take it. One morning, while she showered, I retrieved the second phone from the vent. The same phone I'd seen her stash there on the bathroom camera footage. It was password protected, but I had already cloned it weeks ago. Now I knew the passcode. It opened with a soft click. Her background was a black and white photo of our children. I felt a flash of bitter irony. The texts between her and Elliot were worse than I imagined. They weren't obscene, nothing graphic, but they were intimate. Familiar. The kind of exchanges born from slow building, quiet flames. I miss your voice. I dreamt of you again. Sometimes I pretend I'm walking into our home. Ours. That word stung. Because I had built a home. The physical one, yes, but also the sense of safety, a foundation, and now someone else was standing inside it in her imagination. She hadn't mentioned me once. Not even as a passing shadow. In her world with him, I didn't exist. By Friday, I knew what I had to do. I began laying the groundwork for my next move. First, I met with my attorney, Julia, under the guise of updating our will. I brought the photos, the texts, the voice logs from the second phone. This is more than enough, she said, leafing through the stack. I'm not ready to file yet, I told her. She raised an eyebrow. Then why are you here? I hesitated. I want to do this carefully. No outbursts. No dramatic scenes. Just precision. She nodded. You're playing the long game. Exactly. And I was. Because rage makes mistakes. But control? Control is power. That weekend, I took the kids to the museum while Caroline said she needed time to catch up on some errands. I smiled and nodded. Take your time. We walked through the exhibits slowly, Emma clinging to my hand, Theo racing ahead and back again. I watched them with new eyes. These two little people who didn't know their world was tilting beneath them. I loved them fiercely. And I hated her, just as fiercely, for risking their stability. For the lies, yes, but more for the carelessness. For inviting a fracture into what we had without even trying to discuss what was broken. Because maybe we were drifting. Maybe routine had softened the edges of our connection. But I would have fought for us. She hadn't even tried. Sunday morning, I found the cologne again. Still unopened, in the back of her closet. She hadn't given it to Elliot after all. That startled me more than if she had. Was she waiting for the right moment? Or had she realized it was too obvious, too traceable? Maybe she was having second thoughts. Or maybe she liked having it there. A symbol of something only they shared. I left it untouched. Later, we had brunch as a family. Caroline laughed too easily. Kept checking her phone under the table. Something urgent? I asked mildly, reaching for the butter. She smiled. Just Danielle texting about Mom's birthday next month. I nodded. Tell her I said hi. She did. And then she leaned in and kissed my cheek. Her lips soft, familiar, falsely warm. And I smiled back. Because I knew something she didn't. She thought I was still in the dark. But I was already planning the day I'd drag her secret into the light. And when I did, she wouldn't see it coming. The illusion began to crack on a Wednesday afternoon. Caroline had just left for what she claimed was an extended strategy meeting. Her words, at a downtown cafe with a client. That particular cafe had shown up before in DuPont's reports. A known meeting spot for her and Elliot. I waited exactly 13 minutes before I went into her closet again. The cologne was gone. It was the smallest confirmation, but it jolted me like a thunderclap. I hadn't imagined this. I wasn't paranoid. She was deep in it, whatever it was. And now, she had finally decided to give him the gift. The lie about her imaginary brother, the absurdity of that still simmered in the back of my mind like a slowly burning fuse. She didn't even bother crafting something plausible. Just threw out a quick explanation and moved on, confident I wouldn't question it. But I had questioned it. And now, I had answers. I opened the drawer where she kept her stationery. Inside were a handful of blank cards, leftover birthday gift bags, stickers the kids had once used to decorate her notebooks. and a single, half-filled notepad with her elegant script. I flipped through it. Most of it was mundane, grocery lists, to-dos, things to buy for Emma's class project. But then I stopped at a page torn neatly down the middle. The top half remained. Friday, room 616, 2 p.m., where the Navy. It was in her handwriting. I sat back on the edge of the bed, letting the silence expand around me. Room 616. She wasn't just sneaking off to his apartment or meeting him in his car. This was deliberate. A hotel room. A place where every surface screamed, "This isn't home." And maybe that's what she wanted. Maybe that made it easier to pretend none of this was real. I checked the calendar. Friday was 2 days away. I didn't confront her. Instead, I waited. Friday arrived like a slow-building storm. I pretended to be buried in work when Caroline left that morning in a floral dress and nude heels. She said she'd be late. "No need to wait for dinner," she added casually, brushing her fingers along my shoulder before leaving. I watched her car disappear down the street from the upstairs window. By 1:15 p.m., I was parked a block from the Hotel Varnon. Room 616. I'd called that morning, pretending to be a guest confirming a surprise anniversary reservation. The front desk confirmed the room was reserved under Elliot Brandt. DuPont arrived 5 minutes later in an old gray sedan that looked like it hadn't been washed in a year. He got out, tugged on a cap, and handed me a black envelope. "Don't say I never gave you anything," he muttered. Inside were stills pulled from earlier surveillance, along with a small USB drive. He'd managed to bug Elliot's apartment. Audio only. I swallowed. "And this afternoon?" He nodded toward the hotel. "They're already inside." "Already." I thanked him, then walked down the block, not toward the hotel, but away from it. I couldn't watch. Not yet. That night, Caroline came home around 7:30. She looked flushed, slightly disheveled. Her lipstick was worn down to a stain. She smelled faintly of that cologne, not mine, not hers. The one she'd gifted. I was in the kitchen making grilled cheese for the kids. She kissed my cheek like nothing was wrong. "How was your day?" I asked, slicing the sandwich diagonally the way Theo liked. "Long," she said, sighing. "But productive." I looked at her then. Really looked. She was tired, but not from work. Her body language had changed, more relaxed, as if a tension she'd carried for weeks had been temporarily lifted. She walked differently now. She didn't notice that I noticed. That was her mistake. By Monday morning, I had listened to the audio files. I wasn't sure what I expected. There wasn't anything pornographic. Just whispers. Conversations between two people who had built a parallel world, invisible from mine. One recording stood out. They were lying in bed, it seemed. Her voice was quieter than usual, slower, like she'd just woken up. "Do you think he knows?" she asked. "Elliot, no. He's too good. He trusts you." A long pause. Then a laugh from her. "Maybe he shouldn't." I stopped the recording there. I felt nothing. No anger. No sadness. Just a strange kind of clarity. I began preparing in secret. The first thing I did was transfer a sum of money from our joint account into a private one I'd opened under my name 6 months ago, back when things first started to feel off. She had access to most of our finances, but I'd always kept a backup plan, just in case. Then I made copies of everything. The photos, the texts, the recordings, the hotel confirmation, even the gift receipt from Nordstrom. I created a file labeled Brother, in loving memory, and saved everything there. It was darkly poetic. The final step was subtle. I left the empty cologne box on her side of the closet, where she kept scarves and belts. Visible, but not obvious. Easy to miss, but not if she looked closely. I wanted to see if she would panic. She didn't. 2 days passed. She said nothing. No mention of the box, no change in behavior. If anything, she seemed lighter. Like the lie no longer weighed her down. It wasn't remorse. It was relief. That made my decision easier. I waited until the following weekend. The kids were at my parents' for a sleepover, the first in a while. Caroline and I were alone. After dinner, I opened a bottle of wine, poured us both a glass, sat across from her at the kitchen island. She smiled. "This is nice." I smiled back. "It is." We drank in silence for a few minutes. Then I reached down and slid the black envelope across the marble counter. Her smile faded. "What's this?" she asked, not touching it. I leaned forward, meeting her eyes. "Something I found. Thought you should see it." She hesitated, then slowly opened it. The photos stared back at her. Frozen proof. Her and Elliot. Her car. The hotel. The text messages printed in neat rows. She didn't cry. She didn't deny it. She simply closed the envelope, set her wine glass down, and said, "How long have you known?" "Long enough." A beat passed. Then she whispered, "I didn't want to hurt you." I laughed, sharp and bitter. "You didn't want to get caught." She looked down, her fingers curling around the base of the glass. "It wasn't supposed to go this far." "And yet," I said, "it went exactly that far." Another pause. She didn't apologize. She didn't beg. She just sat there, as if waiting for me to explode, to scream, to storm out. But I didn't. Instead, I smiled. Because that was the moment I knew. She still had no idea what was coming next. I didn't leave that night. Caroline watched me with eyes full of calculation, not remorse. She was waiting to see which version of me would show up, the broken husband, the angry man, or the one who walks out without a word. But I gave her none of those. Instead, I poured myself another glass of wine, as if the confession she never made but had clearly confirmed was just a casual footnote in the evening. "I'm not leaving," I said simply, setting the glass down. "Not yet." She blinked, confused. "You're staying?" "Of course. We have so much to do." "What do you mean?" I stood slowly. "There's something I want you to see." I walked to the study, grabbed the slim gray binder I'd prepared, clean, professional, legal in tone. I placed it in front of her on the counter. The title page read, "Revised Separation Agreement." She didn't touch it. "Read it," I said, stepping back. It was all there. A comprehensive and devastating plan. Full custody of the kids. Division of assets favoring me heavily. Provisions tying her alimony to behavior clauses. A non-disparagement agreement. Visitation rights under strict conditions. Every word written with the precision of a scalpel, designed not just to end our marriage, but to remind her that I would not be a casualty in her story. Her lips parted slightly as she read the first few lines. Then she looked up. "You're divorcing me." "No," I said. "You're divorcing yourself. I'm just formalizing the process." A flush crept up her neck. "You can't. This isn't fair. You don't get to paint me as." "I don't need to paint anything, Caroline." I nodded toward the envelope still sitting beside her. "You already wrote the story. I'm just publishing the ending." She pushed back from the counter, breath shallow. "We can talk about this. Please, don't do something we can't undo." It was the first sign of real panic I'd seen in her. And still, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't gloat. I didn't threaten. I just smiled. The kind of smile that comes not from joy, but from the calm that descends when you know you hold every card in the deck. In the days that followed, the dynamic shifted in ways neither of us acknowledged out loud. She began stepping lightly, as if the floor beneath her might crack open. I could see it in the way she moved around me. Less confident, more watchful. No more evening texts. No more unexplained errands. The second phone disappeared. Her calls, once frequent, stopped entirely when she was out. But it was too late. I had already made my move. While she reeled from the shock of the confrontation, I was laying the final pieces in place. Meeting with our financial advisor to restructure accounts. Updating my beneficiaries. Talking to the kids' school counselor to prepare them for the eventual transition. Looping in Julia, my attorney, on the logistics. Caroline, meanwhile, tried to pretend we were back to normal. She packed the kids' lunches. She offered to make dinner. She even invited me to join her for a weekend family outing, her voice light and falsely bright. I declined, but I waited, because something else was coming, something bigger, and I needed to be ready. The next phase of the plan began quietly, at Elliot's office. DuPont had provided me with a name, an address, and, most importantly, a weakness. Elliot's agency was in the midst of negotiating a major campaign with one of our clients, a financial firm I'd consulted with over the years. They were already nervous about the branding strategy. Conservative clients don't respond well to risk. I placed an anonymous call to the firm's internal compliance officer. "There's someone on your branding team involved in an ongoing affair with a married client," I said carefully. "They've conducted multiple meetings at hotels during work hours. I have documentation if needed." "Who is this?" "A concerned stakeholder," I replied, and hung up. I didn't expect them to drop the contract, but I knew how corporate reputations worked. All it takes is one whiff of scandal, and people start putting distance between themselves and the fire. DuPont sent me the confirmation 2 days later. Elliot had been called into a meeting. His name was removed from the account roster the next morning. One piece down. The second strike came on a Saturday morning. Caroline had taken the kids to a birthday party, and I used the time to visit Ruth and Leonard, her parents. They greeted me like always, warm and oblivious. We sat in the sunroom. I handed them a manila envelope, thinner than the one I'd given Caroline. It didn't contain photos, just a short letter I'd written by hand. It outlined the situation. No venom, no vulgarity, just the facts. I thought you should hear this from me, I said, before you hear it from someone else. Ruth paled. Leonard read the letter twice, slowly. I don't expect you to take sides, I added, standing to leave. But I also won't lie to protect her. They didn't stop me when I walked out. I never found out if they confronted her. But I know that 2 days later, she came home with red eyes and said nothing for the rest of the evening. That week, Caroline began asking questions. What are you planning? What do you want from me? Is there any way we can fix this? And each time, I gave her the same answer. We'll get through this the way we need to. But the truth was, I wasn't interested in fixing anything. This wasn't about forgiveness. It wasn't about rage. It was about balance. She tipped the scales when she looked me in the eye and invented a brother she never had. She lied with the ease of someone who expected to be believed. She betrayed not just our marriage, but the quiet trust that lives in the spaces between daily routines. And now, she was learning what it felt like to lose control. One night, after the kids had gone to bed, she cornered me in the living room. I need to know, she said, voice trembling. What are you going to do? I looked at her, not with hate, but with something colder. Certainty. I already did it. She blinked. Did what? You'll find out soon. The final move was elegant in its simplicity. I mailed a curated packet, again, no return address, to Elliot's firm's HR department. Inside, a photo of him and Caroline at the hotel, a printout of company policy regarding professional conduct, and a note that read, "Careful who you brand with." I don't know what happened after that. I didn't need to. Because Caroline came home 3 days later, white-faced, shaking, and holding her phone like it had burned her. They know, she whispered. I didn't ask who. I didn't need to. Instead, I stood, walked past her, and turned off the light. We're done, I said. Then I went upstairs and left her standing there in the dark. The quiet that followed was a different kind of silence. Not the gentle peace of a sleeping home, but the kind that settles after an earthquake, stunned, disoriented, and too still. I felt it each morning when I woke alone. The space beside me empty by design now, not by coincidence. Caroline moved into the guest room the same night I said, "We're done." She didn't argue. Maybe she finally understood that no speech could undo the blade she had pressed against our life together. There was no grand confrontation after that. Just decay. A slow unraveling, thread by thread. She still made breakfast for the kids. Still asked me if I needed anything from the store. Still tried to smile when we passed in the hallway. But now I saw the effort behind her eyes. A woman exhausted from holding up a facade that had collapsed long ago. The kids noticed something was wrong. Emma, ever sensitive at 9, stopped drawing family portraits. Theo, only 6, started asking why Mommy didn't tuck him in anymore. Just busy, I told him. But I'll always be here. It broke me a little every time I said it. But I kept saying it. The official paperwork came 2 weeks later. Caroline didn't contest anything. Julia was stunned by the lack of resistance. She's either deeply remorseful or she's trying to minimize the damage, she said over the phone. Both, I replied. But it doesn't matter anymore. We signed the papers in a sterile office downtown, in front of a clerk who barely glanced up. No rings. No tears. Just 2 people severing what once felt inseparable. When we stepped outside, the spring breeze carried the scent of fresh-cut grass and faint diesel from a passing bus. It should have felt like freedom. Instead, it just felt empty. I'm sorry, she said softly, not looking at me. I know, I replied. And I meant it. She was sorry. Just far too late. Word spread quietly. Her friends, the ones who used to gather in our kitchen for wine and gossip, stopped inviting her. Elliot vanished from every professional circle we shared. His agency dissolved the branding partnership and scrubbed his name from their directory. I never saw him again. One evening, about a month later, Caroline sat across from me at the dining table after the kids were asleep. We hadn't shared a meal in weeks, but that night, she brought takeout, Thai food, From the place we used to go before we had kids. Thought you might want something familiar, she said, unwrapping the containers. I said nothing, but I didn't stop her either. We ate in silence. When we were done, she looked up, tears quietly sitting in her eyes but never falling. I ruined everything. I nodded. She waited, maybe hoping I'd contradict her. I didn't. She swallowed hard. There was never a brother. You knew that from the beginning, didn't you? I did. And you played along. Why? I set my chopsticks down. Because I needed to see how far you'd go. And because I needed time to become the man who could walk away. She closed her eyes, breathing in as if that truth physically hit her. I don't expect forgiveness, she said. But I hope someday you won't hate me. I don't hate you, I said, surprising even myself. I just don't know you anymore. That's when the first tear fell. And then another. But I didn't comfort her. Not out of cruelty, but because I wasn't her comfort anymore. That right ended the moment she invented a life that didn't include me in it. She gathered the empty containers, tossed them in the trash, and went upstairs without saying goodnight. The custody hearing was uneventful. I was awarded primary custody. She would have the kids every other weekend and Wednesday dinners. It was amicable on paper, but emotionally brutal in every possible way. Emma cried the first night she had to leave with her mother. Theo clung to my leg, asking why he couldn't sleep in his own bed. I held them both until they stopped shaking. Then I held myself together until the door closed behind them. And I fell apart. Time passed, as it always does. I returned to work, found a rhythm again. The empty spaces in the house grew quieter, less angry. I redecorated the guest room and made it my own. The bedroom remained unchanged, a shrine of sorts, until one afternoon I stripped it bare and repainted the walls in a cool slate blue. It felt like breathing for the first time in months. Caroline faded. She became a fixture of the past, a photo in the hallway, a signature on a legal document. We spoke only about the kids. Our texts were factual. Pickup times, schedules, reminders. Never about what once was. Never about us. And then came the letter. It arrived one spring morning, months after the dust had settled. Plain white envelope. No return address. Just my name, written in her handwriting. Inside was a single sheet of paper. You were always better than I deserved. I hope you find peace, even if it's not with me. Thank you for being the kind of man I'll regret losing forever. See, I folded it once, twice, then placed it in the drawer beneath the photos of Emma and Theo. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just let it exist, like a scar, a mark of where something once lived. Eventually, people asked if I'd ever consider dating again. I said maybe. But the truth is, I wasn't rushing toward anything. I wasn't running from the pain, either. I was just existing, trying to figure out who I was outside of her, outside of the betrayal, outside of the story she and I had written together, only for her to scribble across the final chapters with someone else's name. And in that space, something else began to grow. Not revenge, not bitterness, but clarity. The kind that comes from losing everything and realizing you're still standing. The kind that turns silence into strength. Some nights, when the house is still and the kids are asleep, I sit by the window and look at the stars. Emma says each one is a wish someone made. Theo says they're just giant balls of gas. I think maybe they're both right. I made a wish once, years ago. I wished for a family, for love, for a partner to walk beside me through every season. And for a time, I had it. But wishes are fragile things. Now, I've stopped wishing. I've started building. Slowly, quietly. And this time, it's on a foundation no one can lie their way through. Not even a brother who never existed.